Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of WE3's Clean Tech Innovation Series. Today, we have a great guest. We have Duanne Andrade from the Solar Energy Loan Fund. And to kick off that conversation, I'm going to pass it over to my friend Laurel Morris. Take it away, Laurel.
Thank you, Dylan. It's a pleasure to be here today with Duanne. If you've been watching this WE3 series every Thursday, you know we love to start things off to get to know our special guests better with a speed round. So starting with the question, what things give you energy in the workplace, Duanne?
Well, what things, I guess that I'm going to go from things to an abstract concept. What gives me energy in the workplace is the challenge that I have every day to finalize a project, kickstart a project, create something new, and connect with a team of amazing people that work with me. That is where I draw my energy from.
Absolutely, me too. What's the most challenging part of your job?
Oh, same, putting it down at night. Putting it down on the weekends, trying to actually stop thinking about what we can do next. What problem can we try and tackle next? Even with our limited capacity, what big issue are we willing to face head on and try and pilot and to solve and show the world that, when you have the will, you maybe can contribute a little grain of salt to solving certain issues.
Right, there's so much power when you get a small group of people, you can really make a difference. The last question is, what's something you believe that other people may think is crazy?
Well, I think people think it's crazy to I'm going to talk about, obviously, directly, things directly related to my work. People think it's crazy for us to give loans to people with low credit scores, with low incomes, that don't have anything to give us as a guarantee. I get that a lot. People think we're crazy, but yet here we are after 10 years of doing that, and $20 million later, we're in a good spot. We've done it well, and we've proven that people are credit worthy, have dignity, and that a score doesn't define them. So we love to prove that.
Excellent. You were ahead of your time when you and Doug first led your Green Bank's Solar and Energy Loan Fund. What initially drew you to green banking?
Yeah, we were ahead of our time. 10 years ago, we just mentioned a few things that were very different. One is, for example, solar energy, solar panels. So anything solar was, number one, very expensive. So it was seen as something as a kind of like a luxury item, only the rich and only the tree huggers per se, would be talking about solar. So it was something very exclusive. Then the technology also was still kind of in testing mode. I mean, it wasn't as good as it is now, simply spoken, like everything, it evolved. And so two things happened is that solar pricing went down by around 90% in the last 10 years. So now it's actually affordable and accessible. The other thing was the way the conversation was being had around energy efficiency and clean energy. It was all about the math, the penciling out of the investment in energy efficiency, whether it would provide an ROI, whether it would pay itself back. And there was a big piece missing, which was the climate resilience and the social equity piece of it, or the social impact piece of it. And the realization today that, when we talk about energy efficiency, solar, climate resilience, it's really about the impact it has on people, on our everyday lives. So there was this isolated conversation in a silo about technology, about financing, but not about the people component. So that was something that was not being talked about, but we actually were ahead of our time in that as well, because we were talking about unlocking the potential of financing for low and moderate income populations to access these green technologies, not because it necessarily, the savings would pay for the loan, but because of the impact we could have on people's lives, and moving the needle based on those impacts. So we embraced climate resilience early on, and we kind of saw the connection and treated energy efficiency, clean energy, and climate resilience as an ecosystem. So that is the piece of, what is different. And then the second piece is what got me into green banking. It was the same thing that got me into microfinance in Mexico prior to coming here. And that is the the realization of the power that financing has to unlock opportunities for people to lead better lives. And the same thing applies with green financing and green banks. It's the power, the transformative power of financing applied in the sector and made inclusive. And the challenge to make green financing inclusive was what got me into green banks.
Mhm. Excellent. That the low and moderate income working class are on the front lines of the negative impacts of climate change. So they can benefit the most from the microfinancing that you're doing. And what do you see as the power of green banks as opposed to other types of banks?
Yeah, well, the power of green banks is in being able to deliver um, transformation in communities
Mhm.
through flexible, innovative, creative financing for projects that involve energy efficiency, clean energy, climate resilience, and more. And the reason why it's different is because green banks are financing things that traditional entities would not finance, would not feel comfortable underwriting. We're underwriting deals based on benefits that go beyond, again, the financial benefit. So green banks have the ability to customize these programs and to transform not only communities through investing in projects that are going to reduce energy burdens, which you talked about, especially in low and moderate income communities that are disproportionately energy burdened. You can transform their lives. You can transform communities by revitalizing neighborhoods with better housing, for example, that includes energy efficiency, so they are affordable to operate and live in, but also provide health and comfort. So then you also have the clean energy part, is when you prepare a home and weatherize it and seal it up and make it energy efficient, then you can go solar. Then you can create more cash flows for low and moderate income communities to shift towards other things like health or education or just simple basic necessities. So you have the capacity to really reduce that burden, free up cash flow so people could be less energy burdens, have better quality of lives. But in the process, you're transforming communities. You're moving the needle on how we are viewing our communities. We're planning for the future. We're trying to right now transform the existing stock to greener stock, so that in the future, so that now and in the future, people can afford to live comfortably with health, with energy efficiency, and ultimately the result of all that is a reduced carbon footprint, is reduced carbon emissions. And that is ultimately what we want to do, is try and mitigate that climate change aspect.
Mhm. What do you think would surprise traditional banks about your green loan program results?
Well, we work with traditional banks. In fact, our largest investor right now is a bank. It's shout out to them. It's Bank United, who has been with us for a long time and throughout this journey, and has become like a growth partner. And they invest in us because there's also a benefit for them to access CRA credits. But at this point, it's really what they believe that we can do, and they have seen the results. So what's the thing that surprises banks the most and continues and always did is the fact that we do unsecured loans. So we do small size. That's kind of our bread and butter. We also do other things, but we mostly do $8,000 to $10,000 loans for a high efficiency air conditioner for a roof, $15,000 maybe. We'll finance windows, hurricane impact windows and doors. We'll finance solar water uh, heaters and just like basic stuff. And they're unsecured. And what we do is we underwrite based on ability to repay, which is a longer process than what banks like to do. And there is no security. There's maybe a cosigner, maybe a small cash collateral that we ask them once in a while, but that's what banks are most surprised with is we do all this unsecured lending and yet we've had historically less than 2% default rate. So they're always like, well, why would people pay you back? And we always, my background in micro lending and working with so many women, mostly in rural areas and doing this method, micro lending method for many years, I always say, well, what we're missing out on is that people actually have a sense of reciprocity when you give them a chance. So a lot of people just pay us because they're thankful they were able to get a loan to get a high efficiency air conditioner that could cool their homes and provide comfort and also affordability.
Mhm. Exactly. And because this is a water energy series, the first project I'd like to ask you about is your water infrastructure story. So there was a headline that said sea level rise makes septic tanks ticking bombs in Florida. So septic tanks are, many properties just have a septic tank where all of their toilet and excrements go, and rather than going through a sewer in a city, they just go into a tank that often leaks. So in Florida, there are over 100,000 septic tanks polluting waters that have presented a huge public health risk for the last 50 years. And even when a utility builds a sewer system to replace septic tanks, each resident still must pay about $10,000 to connect their home to that sewer line that the utility or city has built. So Duanne, I'd love to hear your story about how you developed a solution to this decades-long challenge facing Florida.
Yeah, thank you. And it's a great way to remind everybody that climate is, not only the carbon emissions and the energy efficiency and clean energy side, but it's also, of course, water conservation and water quality issues. And just to add to your points, not only is it a public health issue, but it's been contaminating our water systems. So, for example, here in Florida, we have the privilege of living right next to the North America's most biodiverse estuary, and a lot of the runoffs and the leakages and all these things end up in the waterways, contaminating our natural oceans and estuaries and the wildlife there too. So it is definitely, everything is definitely an ecosystem. So with that, I wanted to refer to your question. So green banks, again, as a green bank, we have the power and the ability to customize programs to address these issues. And Martin County Utility here in Florida, Martin County is a municipal utility, and they had built out the infrastructure to try and get people to connect to the sewer lines and get off of septic tanks to address these issues. So the first thing I want to say is that is leadership, and that is will. So you have to have that. And what they did was they went after some grants. And once they built out the infrastructure, they had about $200,000 that they were going to use to finance this conversion. So let's keep the average at 10,000, although it did go down a little bit, but let's not get into details. So they had $10,000 a pot, so they would do 20 projects with $200,000, and they would put out kind of this financing over 10 years and try to recover that and put it back out. And so if you think about it in that way, they would be financing 20 projects per year, basically, or less, 20 projects the first year and then 10. I mean, it's just not something that they could scale. And the other thing is that they're not a financing entity. So they reached out to us and they said, hey, would you guys be able to kind of manage this money for us and this program? We want to do 20 projects. And we said, well, why don't we think about this? So we got together and we thought, well, why do 20 projects when we could do 200? Well, how? Well, we said, why don't we use the $200,000? Why don't you use the $200,000 to provide like a rebate, a buy down? So give everybody, to motivate them, reduce the cost by another $1,000. And then if your payment plan had an $85 payment per month, then we'll build the loan around that payment. So we actually created a loan, a 10-year loan with an $85 payment, exactly like they were going to do with their money, and said, we're going to bring in $2 million. And what you're going to do with the $200,000 is provide $200,000 rebates. So, so in that way, we partnered. And I said, the only thing that, I say, I, as a CFO developing this new loan program, in conversations with them, said, well, here's the thing. We're going to have to extend the term to 10 years to be able to make that payment. So in exchange, what we need is for you to collect on your water bill, so that it reduces the risk and I can go out and raise capital. So we leveraged their $200,000 with $2 million. And so far, this has only started a couple of months ago. We've deployed about $500,000, a little bit more. So the program is running successfully, and hopefully it's going to be replicated. And hopefully this is one of the ways that we're able to solve the problem. It's not, again, it's a piece of the puzzle, but we can come in and work in partnerships with local governments and with other nonprofits. And this is another great thing about green banks, is we really can bring in public, private, and philanthropic capital, blend all that, and come up with solutions. So that's how we did the MCU Connect to Protect program.
Congratulations on launching that this year.
Thank you. Yeah,
I just know that other people in Florida, other utilities and counties will see that and replicate it and reach out. So you have
hopefully
many other projects in Florida that help communities on the front lines of the climate crisis. And one project I'd like to draw attention to is the Atlanta Housing Project. I wanted to ask, how are you going about cracking the nut of the landlord's incentive to upgrade energy efficiency?
Yeah, thank you. So again, we're Florida based, but we have a small footprint in South Carolina, in Alabama, and now opening up Georgia through Atlanta. And this is, again, I'm going to start again with leadership and will. There is incredibly great leadership at the Atlanta Housing Authority. And shout out to Adelaide Steele and her team, because they are looking for ways to be able to reduce the energy burden on low-income rentals, tenants. And, there's no incentive for landlords that have housing in the housing system, in the housing choice voucher system, or subsidized housing, in other words, to make these investments. So they have minimum standards that make the homes affordable to rent, but not necessarily affordable to live in and operate and make, and provide a quality of life. So the Atlanta Housing Authority, this actually comes from them, said, again, we would like to figure out a way to reduce the energy burden for the low-income tenants. And we need to motivate the landlords to make these investments. So they said, we are willing to provide a rent boost in order to motivate and incentivize landlords to make these investments. But we don't, how do we just provide a rent boost, and who does all the part of the energy efficiency upgrade, and who finances? So we come in and we said, we'll do it. So we worked with them, as it's, these projects take time. So we worked for about a year developing this project. whereby we bring in capital. Again, we are bringing in fresh capital to finance these upgrades that are about $10,000 investments in these homes. And we're offering a totally new unsecured loan to landlords so that landlords can upgrade these units in energy efficiency with energy efficiency technologies that will reduce the energy burden by about 30 to 40% or more in some cases. And in exchange, by making these investments, the Atlanta Housing does kind of an inspection and they verify everything, and they provide the option of a rent boost that will be that kicks in place and becomes part of the rent forevermore. So if that landlord keeps their home in the affordable housing programs, they will now have a higher rent going forward. And by the way we designed it was that the maximum rent boost would be equal to the maximum loan payment. So $175 is the maximum rent boost, and the maximum payment for a $10,000 loan was $175. So basically, they would be able to repay the loan with a rent boost without having to take any money out of pocket. And then after they pay the loan, they keep the rent boost as additional income. So I hope, I'm sorry, I try to make it as simple as possible to explain these programs, but I hope it was understandable.
That's really interesting. And if people would like to learn more about how you can do those programs, then totally reach out to Duanne.
Yeah, please.
She's definitely open to partnerships. And you started at the grassroots level with micro lending, and now you're growing up a bit. You're starting to finance capital stack gaps, which are transformational for the clean energy future and climate resilience. Could you explain what exactly capital stack gaps are and how you got into this space?
Yes. So typically, again, when we look at affordable housing, and we, of course, as right now, you probably already figured that out, we're focused on the residential sector. So when we go from the single family home to trying to address energy burdens and climate resilience in multifamily and affordable housing at a larger scale, what we started to find is that there isn't the right kind of capital to really push for a higher green standard, meaning a more energy efficient, climate resilient, and even solar type of affordable housing that would actually then benefit the tenants with lower energy burdens and with higher protection against climate impacts. So the way it works is that developers will be able to are able to access capital for like about 90% of the stack. In other words, if the project is $2 million, or $1 million, they'll be able to access 900,000 from banks, from low-income tax credits, from a series of opportunities that are out there and traditional tools that developers use. But then there's like a 10 to 15% gap that has to be filled typically with private equity funds or, private investment funds. And those funds are coming in at around 15, 14, 15, 16%. They're more expensive. So what that does is it reduces the profit for the developers and also demotivates and de-incentivizes investments in higher standards. So affordable housing developers look to make the housing as cheap as possible from the construction perspective, meet absolute minimum standards, and therefore don't have any reason to really make these affordable housing better. So what we said was, well, in that 10% that's missing, that makes that whole capital stack more expensive with that 16 to 70% capital, we're going to step in and provide 5% capital. And then that way, but the condition is, well, we'll give you flexible, unsecured, very, very easy kind of to access. We'll take a second, third position, whatever, but we'll fill that gap with a condition that you raise the standard and make investments in energy efficiency, solar when possible, and climate resilience. So that's how we're trying to motivate the transformation of affordable housing. And really, it all boils down to capital. I mean, this is why the power of capital, I mean, it's catalytic, it's transformational. When you can provide the right type of capital so that the developers, still profit, and then everybody benefits. The tenants will benefit, the housing authorities will benefit, and society will benefit because you'll have a better housing stock that will save lives, will save money, and will protect people when climate events happen, which they will.
Mhm. Thank you. There's so many great projects that you're working on, and I'm wondering about how you can scale and how we can create more green banks like you. And there's a legislation piece that could help do so. So SELF was created with the Department of Energy funds from the Obama stimulus package. And now there's a potential for a National Climate Bank Act that's otherwise known as the Clean Energy and Sustainability Accelerator Act in Congress. You've actually testified in the Senate and the Climate Crisis Committee in Congress. How have you made the case for why we need a national climate bank?
Great question. So first of all, let me start by saying there are 23 green banks across the nation right now, and more in formation every day. And green banks take on different shapes and forms. They're formed with public funding, sometimes state funding. They're very diverse. And so we need to have green banks in all states. And we also may need more than one green bank per state, depending on that state. So yes, we are very interested in having the ability to fund these new green banks. But most importantly, it's not about the green banks. It's about really having a way, a channel, think of it as a funnel, to channel funding into these projects throughout the nation. And the reason we say green banks is because of all the reasons I mentioned before. We are flexible. We know how to underwrite things that traditional financing entities don't know how to finance. So the case for the National Climate Bank, otherwise known as the CISA or the Clean Energy and Sustainability Accelerator, is that if the federal government would create a nonprofit independent entity with the funding, instead of channeling it through the traditional DOE or EPA, which, by the way, yes, have great programs. But the difference would be that by creating an independent nonprofit, then the green banks can leverage those funds tremendously. We could use those funds as loan loss reserves. We could use them as equity type capital, catalytic capital. We can bring in other private capital and then make it larger and make it a revolving loan fund with the sufficient flexibility needed to create these projects. Because you just heard me. I mean, these projects that we're creating and testing and piloting, they're only made possible because we, as a CDFI, as a Community Development Finance Institution certified by US Treasury, have the ability to access CDFI funds once a year. That provides us with a little bit of flexible capital, 0%, and in a grant form that we can test, that we can use to test these programs. The same concept would apply to a national climate bank, which is we would have these funds that are flexible. Some of them would be used to build capacity, because the biggest thing holding us back from scaling more, and most green banks, is the lack of capital to build capacity. It's always like, well, how are we going to pay for this? So a national climate bank would really create a catalytic effect and create like this watershed of capital flowing towards the projects across the nation through green banks who are mission driven, purpose driven, and not profit driven.
Excellent. That's wonderful. And we've come to the end of the hour. So I want to thank you again, Duanne, for coming and joining the We3 series. and calling the audience next week. We have a break from We3. There won't be a special guest next Thursday because we have our Energy Thought Summit next week. So you can check that out at theenergythoughtsummit.com and join us at the next Thursday's We3 series. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for the work you're doing and sharing this information.
Thank you.